The caterers were already setting up when I pulled into the driveway. That was the first thing I noticed. Not my brother standing at the door. Not the string lights someone had hung across the front porch. The caterers, a crew I had never seen before, unloading trays from a white van, working out of a kitchen I had been paying the utilities on for the past 3 years. My brother's engagement party. And nobody had told me it was happening today. I sat in my car for a moment. I had driven 40 minutes from my apartment, the one I had finally gotten 6 months ago, the one I had stopped apologizing for having because my mother had called and said, "Come for dinner, just the family, nothing big." I had believed her. I believed her most of the time, which, looking back now, was its own kind of problem. I turned off the engine, took my bag, walked to the door. My mother opened it before I could knock. She looked past my shoulder first, checking, I assumed, whether I had brought anything. I hadn't. Nobody told me to. "You're late," she said. "I didn't know there was a time," I said. She let me in anyway. "My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. I have a master's degree in accounting, a job I have worked at for 7 years, and a very particular habit of showing up when people call me, even when I probably shouldn't. My brother's name is Ryan. He is 34. He is charming in the way that certain people are charming effortlessly, and mostly for their own benefit. Our mother has always described him as the one who takes after our father. I was never sure if she meant that as a compliment. Ryan got engaged 8 months ago to a woman named Stephanie, who is perfectly nice and who I genuinely have nothing against. The engagement party had apparently been in the works for 2 of those 8 months. I found this out that night, from our aunt, who assumed I had known. "You helped plan it, didn't you?" she asked. "I helped pay for it," I said, before I realized what I was saying. She gave me a look I didn't have the energy to interpret. Here is what I mean when I say I helped pay for it. For the past 3 years, since my father passed and left behind more debt than any of us had expected, I had been quietly covering a rotation of family expenses. Not because anyone asked me directly, they never did it directly. It was always a phone call, a mention, a by the way, a silence that expected to be filled. My brother's car note for 4 months while he was between opportunities. My mother's property tax when the escrow account came up short. The deposit on the venue for the engagement party, which my mother had asked me to front and promise to pay back before the end of the month. The end of that month had been 6 weeks ago. I had never brought it up. I had told myself it was family, and family didn't keep score. I had repeated that to myself so many times that I had almost started to believe it. Almost. The party was not a dinner. It was 40 people, catered appetizers, a bartender, and a photo station with a sign that said Ryan and Stephanie finally. I stood near the kitchen and watched people I had not seen in years hug my brother and compliment the venue and ask Stephanie where she had found her dress. Ryan laughed at everything. He had always been good at that, filling a room with the sound of himself. At some point he found me. "Claire, hey." He hugged me with one arm, the kind of hug that communicates you are being acknowledged but not prioritized. "Glad you made it. I didn't know this was happening today," I said. "Mom called you, didn't she?" "She called me for dinner." He shrugged with his whole body, the way he did when he decided something was not his problem. "You know how she is. She hates making things complicated." I thought about the deposit, the car note, the 4 months of electric bills I had absorbed without a word. "Yeah," I said. "I know." What happened over the next 2 hours, I will try to describe without letting the anger change the shape of it, because the anger is not the point. The point is what I finally understood by the end of the night. Stephanie's mother pulled me aside at one point to thank me. She had a warm handshake and the kind of sincerity you don't encounter very often. "Ryan talks about you constantly," she said. "He says you're the reason this family stays together." "He said that?" I asked. "All the time." She smiled. "It must be wonderful, having a sister who's so reliable." Reliable. I had heard that word applied to me my whole life. At work it was a compliment. In my family it had always meant something closer to available. Later, my mother gathered the immediate family for a toast. She talked about Ryan's good heart, his drive, his loyalty to the people he loved. She talked about Stephanie being the missing piece. She talked about my father watching from wherever good people go. She did not mention me. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it was the moment I realized that my presence in this family had become entirely structural. I was load-bearing. And load-bearing things don't get thanked, they just get used until they crack. My cousin Marcus was standing next to me during the toast. Afterward, he leaned over and said, quietly, "She forgot to mention you." "It's fine," I said. "Is it?" I didn't answer. I got another glass of water and went to find my coat. I did not make a scene. I want to be clear about that, because everything that came after has a way of making people assume I must have done something dramatic in that room. And I didn't. I said goodbye to Stephanie, who hugged me genuinely, and told me she was so glad I came. I told Ryan to text me. I told my mother the food was good. Then I drove home, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I opened my laptop. I have a folder I had almost forgotten it existed where I kept records. Receipts, transfers, screenshots of Venmo requests that were never fulfilled, notes I had typed to myself at midnight, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I had always known that one day I would need to see it all laid out. I started going through it. 4 months of Ryan's car note. $1,480. Property tax shortfall, 2 years ago. $2,200. Party venue deposit, $1,800. Groceries, covered during my mother's surgery recovery. Utilities during the month Ryan moved back home. The deductible on my mother's car after the fender bender, she didn't want to tell her insurance company about. By the time I reached the bottom of the folder, the number was bigger than I had let myself consciously think about. Not life-ruining, but significant. Significant enough. I closed the laptop. I did not call anyone. I did not send a text. I simply sat there and made a quiet decision that I had probably been building toward for much longer than one night. The decision was not dramatic either. It was more like a door closing gently on its own. I stopped covering things. The next time my mother called about a bill, I told her I was sorry. I was stretched thin this month. The next time Ryan texted asking if I could spot him until his next check, I said I was dealing with some unexpected expenses. I wasn't rude about it. I wasn't cold. I just stopped. For about 3 weeks, nothing much happened. The family continued to function, more or less. They found other workarounds. Or they didn't, and they dealt with the discomfort themselves, which it turns out people are capable of doing when they don't have another option. Then Ryan and Stephanie set a wedding date. The wedding was planned for 8 months out. My mother called me to tell me the date, which I appreciated. And then she told me that she and Ryan had been talking about the finances, and they were thinking I could contribute what I had toward the venue deposit. I already contributed a deposit, I said. For the engagement party. This is for the wedding. And what happened to the engagement party deposit I put in? A pause. That's been absorbed into the overall budget. I asked her what that meant. She explained, in the way she explained things when she thought I was being difficult, that the engagement party had cost more than expected, and the money had been used to cover those costs, and it all balanced out in the end. I thought about telling her that it did not, actually, balance out. That I had a spreadsheet that showed exactly how it did not balance out. I decided not to. I'm not going to be able to contribute to the venue deposit, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Claire. This is your brother's wedding. I know. I'll be there. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean, I said. I'm not going to be able to do it. She did not say goodbye before she hung up. She just stopped talking, and after a moment the line went quiet. What came next, I was not entirely prepared for, even though I should have been. Ryan called me 2 days later. He was calm at first, the way he got when he was deciding how to approach something. He said he and Stephanie were stressed, that wedding planning was harder than people said, that he just needed to know he could count on me. You can count on me to show up, I said. I'll be there. I'll get a gift off the registry. I will be a good sister at your wedding. That's not, he stopped. Started again. We're family, Claire. Yes, I said. So, I don't understand why you're making this hard. I had heard that phrase before. Making this hard. As if the natural state of things was for me to make it easy. and any deviation from that was a choice I was making against them. I'm not making anything hard, I said. I'm just not covering the deposit. He said a few more things after that. His voice got louder. He used the word selfish. He said I had always had a problem being a team player, which was interesting given the spreadsheet I had sitting on my laptop, but I did not mention the spreadsheet. When he finished, I told him I loved him, and I hoped the planning went well. He hung up. Then my mother stopped calling. Not dramatically. She didn't announce it. She just became unavailable when I reached out, slow to respond, brief when she did reply. The temperature dropped by degrees, the way it does when a family collectively decides that someone is in the wrong and communicates it through silence. I noticed. I won't pretend it didn't affect me. There were nights when I second-guessed myself, turned the numbers over in my head, wondered if I had calculated wrong, if my sense of what I was owed was distorted by something I couldn't see. But I kept coming back to the engagement party. 40 guests, a bartender, string lights, a deposit I had fronted, and never been paid back. My mother's toast that moved through every person in the room except for me. And Stephanie's mother squeezing my hand, saying Ryan talks about you constantly. He says you're the reason this family stays together. I thought about that, about being the reason something stays together, about how the thing that holds other things in place is often the last thing anyone thinks to look at until it's gone. The wedding planning fell apart about 3 months in. I didn't cause it. I want to be precise about that. I didn't call the venue. I didn't interfere with vendors. I didn't say a word to anyone outside my own front door. What happened was simply that a plan built on the assumption of my participation collapsed when that participation was removed. The original venue had required a second deposit by a certain date. Ryan and my mother had apparently planned to use money from a joint account my father had left, which it turned out was more complicated to access than they had thought. They scrambled. They found a different venue, smaller, less expensive. That venue had a conflict on the original date. The wedding date changed. This caused a cascade. Guests who had already booked travel. Stephanie's family, who had planned around the original date. Her parents, who had quietly contributed to certain costs, assuming a specific timeline. My cousin Marcus texted me around this time. Just checking in. You doing okay? I told him I was fine. I asked how he knew to ask. He said the family group chat had gotten interesting. I had been removed from the family group chat 4 weeks earlier. I hadn't brought it up to anyone. The first call came on a Tuesday. It was Ryan. The anger was gone, scraped out of him by whatever the past few months had cost. He sounded like someone who had been awake for a long time. He said he was sorry about some of the things he had said, that he had been stressed, and he had taken it out on me, and that wasn't fair. I thanked him. Then he asked if there was any way I could help with a specific vendor invoice that had come in higher than expected. I was quiet for a moment. Ryan, I said, I'm really glad you called. I mean that. And I'm glad you said what you said. But I'm not going to be able to help with the invoice. Claire. I'll be at the wedding, I said. I'll be dressed, I'll be smiling, I'll dance at the reception. But I'm not going to keep covering expenses. That's not changing. He was quiet. I don't really understand what happened to you, he said finally. It wasn't cruel. It sounded genuinely confused. Like he was trying to locate the moment things had shifted and couldn't find it. Nothing happened to me, I said. I just got tired. My mother called the following week. Her voice was different. Not cold, not warm, somewhere in the middle. In the register she used when she was trying to be reasonable, and it cost her something. She said she had been thinking about our conversation. She said she realized she hadn't always been as appreciative as she should have been. She said she knew things had been hard since my father died, and that maybe the family hadn't handled things the right way. I listened. I let her finish. Then she said, So I'm hoping we can start fresh. And part of that is we really need some help with the rehearsal dinner. I sat with that for a second. It was almost impressive. The acknowledgement lasting exactly as long as it needed to before the request arrived. Mom, I said, I love you. I'm going to be at the rehearsal dinner, but I'm not paying for it. She made a sound I had heard before, not quite a sigh. Not quite frustration, something that lived between them. I don't understand why you're doing this to the family, she said. I'm not doing anything to the family, I said. I'm doing something for myself. She said she needed some time to process that. I told her I understood. She hung up. I went to the wedding. It was smaller than they had originally planned, at a venue I hadn't seen before, with a guest list that had been trimmed twice. It was still a real wedding, flowers, a cake, Stephanie in a dress that made Ryan go speechless when she walked in. He cried. I had never seen my brother cry before. It was one of the most human things I had ever watched him do. I cried too, a little, standing in the second row. Not because I was sad and not because I was angry, because she looked happy, because he looked like someone who had finally arrived somewhere he had been trying to get to for a long time. Because it was possible to love people and still be done carrying them. At the reception, Stephanie found me before dinner. She took both my hands. She looked at me for a moment, the way people rarely look at each other. I know things have been hard, she said. And I want you to know I see it. I don't think you know how much I see. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just held her hands and nodded. He's going to figure it out, she said. He's slow, but he gets there. I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in what felt like months. You're good for him, I said. I know, she said, and smiled, and went back to her husband. I did not give a speech. Nobody asked me to, and I didn't offer. I danced at the reception, like I said I would. I talked to relatives I hadn't seen in years. My mother sat across the room from me for most of the night. We made eye contact once. She nodded. I nodded back. It was not forgiveness. I don't know what it was, something smaller and more honest. I left before the last song. I said goodbye to Stephanie and Ryan, and shook hands with her parents, and retrieved my coat from the back of a chair, and walked out into a parking lot that smelled like April, which is the kind of thing you notice when you stop waiting for something to happen and realize it already did. That was 7 months ago. Things are different now. Not healed, I'm not going to use that word, because I think it sets an expectation that doesn't match reality. Different. Ryan paid me back. Not everything, but more than I expected. He called one afternoon and said he had done some math and he wanted to address it directly, and then he named a number that wasn't the full amount but was enough that I understood it had cost him something to put together. I told him thank you and I meant it. My mother and I talk on the phone about twice a month. We don't talk about money. We talk about her garden, a show she's been watching, updates about cousins I've lost track of. It is a smaller relationship than the one I thought we had. I think it might be a truer one. The folder is still on my laptop. I don't open it anymore. I've thought about deleting it, and I haven't. Maybe I'm keeping it the same way you keep a receipt after a purchase that taught you something. Not to go back. Just to remember what it cost. The thing I think about most, when I think about all of it, is what Stephanie's mother said, the night of the engagement party. He says, "You're the reason this family stays together." I used to take pride in that. I used to think being necessary was the same as being valued. It isn't. The reason a house stays standing has nothing to do with whether the house is grateful. Structures don't thank their foundations. They just press down on them until something gives. I decided to stop being something that could be pressed into giving. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just what happened when I did.